In the hours, days, and weeks following Hurricane Floyd, help poured into eastern North Carolina from all over the country. The Salvation Army set up a number of makeshift kitchens across the region to meet the most immediate need of the homeless. Distribution and collection centers were also set up to help families get the most basic necessities in the hours following.
Every once in a while, something happens that proves to you, no matter how hard you work, you are never completely in control.
Floodwaters in Tarboro behind them. Politicians make promises to a desperate crowd.
We have already authorized FEMA to provide for direct federal assistance to clean up the 66 counties in North Carolina that have been hurt. Today, the Department of Agriculture will approve a disaster food stamp program to help people who need help to get food for their families.
The effects of Hurricane Floyd were not lost on North Carolina Governor Jim Hunt. He too visited several areas that were wiped out by the storm. In Pitt County, he met with local leaders and toured the Emergency Operations Center. In Jones County, the governor stopped at the Civic Center in Trenton. There, he heard stories of volunteers helping out, even though their own homes were totally destroyed. But perhaps his most moving experience came at a meeting in Duplin County with local residents.
The helicopter had hardly stopped when Governor Hunt and state leaders leaped out, shook hands, and dived into a sea of questions, a sea of emotions at the Chinkapin shelter.
I want to get them to just kind of give us a little report on what is going on here now in Duplin County, and then we want to know what your needs are, what we can do to help.
People that can't repay any kind of loans can qualify for cash assistance, and everybody can qualify.
Even local governments weren't immune to this disaster. Here, Kinston and Lenoir County leaders sit down with representatives from FEMA to begin the process of applying for help.
We're getting the representatives of the various municipalities, of the various emergency organizations, state, local people, all in one room there, and explain to them how they can go about seeking reimbursement.
Even FEMA Director James Lee Witt came to eastern North Carolina on several occasions in the weeks following the floods to see the devastation firsthand.
Brenda Morris of Kinston is among the hundreds and hundreds of flood victims flooding the Federal Emergency Management Agency Relief Center here.
We still can't return to our property yet, but at this point, I think I lost both of my trailers.
So she's here looking for help from the government to get back on her feet.
There's a lot of good things happening.
And today she and others here got a visit from FEMA Director James Lee Witt. He says despite any criticism, his agency is working as fast as it can and as hard as it can to provide immediate relief. But there are limits on what they can do.
People need to understand this. Our programs will not replace everything they've lost. They're not designed to do that.
Also touring the flood damage here, EPA Administrator Carol Browner. She says there's no question what happened here is an environmental nightmare. But also as she looks at what did happen, she's confident Eastern Carolina can recover.
I know it's not going to feel like it for the people here yet, but it will. I mean, it does get back here. We're going to be here. FEMA's going to be here. We're going to be working with the state until the problems are solved.
And for many, like Brenda Morris, the biggest problem is finding a place to live.
Perhaps one of the hardest tasks in aiding the storm victims was locating caskets of loved ones that were unearthed in the floodwaters.
We're going to try to do what we did in North Dakota, which is to get as many trailers as possible available for people to live in that can be taken to their property.
Other national public figures followed. U.S. Surgeon General David Satcher made a trip to Tarboro and Princeville, pledging to ease health concerns in the flood-ravaged areas. Martin Luther King III also made a special trip to the eastern part of the state, to Greenville and Tarboro. And the Reverend Jesse Jackson made it a point to visit several areas, including Raleigh and Rocky Mount. Aside from public figures, those who have no notoriety came out in force to show they cared. They are the unsung heroes. Sheriff's deputies, police officers, fire and rescue personnel, wildlife officers, the National Guard, the Coast Guard, the Air Force, the Marines.
The missions are winding down, but that doesn't mean the work is over for these guys. Marines from Camp Lejeune, part of Task Force Gator. It's a small unit, but one that packs a big punch, bringing a lot of relief to the folks here around Burgaw.
We commenced search and rescue operations with the local authorities, the Sheriff's Department and EMS services, to go out and help them recover people that were stranded out there, as well as people needing emergency service in areas that no other vehicle except the assault amphibian vehicle or the light LAV could get to.
These Amtraks and 8-wheeled armored cars can both swim. That's a huge advantage in flooded areas, allowing these Marines to get in and rescue more than a dozen people and take needed supplies back into folks who didn't want to leave their homes.
And some, quite frankly, don't want to come out. They want to stay with their property. Unfortunately, most of what we saw out there's no property left. Water's up to rooftop levels. Cars are completely underwater. And there's a lot of people just floating around, tied up together in boats out there, and trying to maintain whatever sense of community they had.
It's a tough sight for these young Marines who only expected to see this kind of thing in a third world country, not in their own backyard.
We've let them know that we're here to help them. We don't need support. We're here to support them.
Virtually every school system in eastern Carolina fell victim to Floyd's floods. Classes were canceled for several weeks in some areas. Some schools would never open again. Books, computers, desks, chairs, backpacks, even lockers full of memories were wiped out in an instant. Other schools heard the pleas for help and reached out. Student council members from Swansboro Middle School carted boxfuls of textbooks, backpacks, and pencils to CM Epps Middle School in Greenville. Students say they were compelled to do something.
It's like a warm fuzzy. You know that other kids out there are in need, and it makes you realize how fortunate you are.
What message do you want to get out to all the folks in eastern North Carolina?
That the federal government is committed to doing whatever we can to help people get back in their homes, help the farmers, the small business people, the communities rebuild. It's going to take some time. We have to go back and make sure that the laws we have are adequate, and if they are, then we have to make sure the money's there. But I want to encourage people to keep their spirits up. A lot of lives have been saved that could have been lost. It could be worse than it is, as tough as it is, and we're going to stay with you to get back on your feet.
The flood of the century. 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 The flood of the century.